So a couple months ago, we had some awesome reviews from bringing on the old angry Santa strength coach, Coach Nate Harvey. We were talking about box squats. We were talking about why we love them and how we don't understand why people don't love them. But you know what? We had to do this again because that was a fiery episode. They actually took it over on EliteFTS.com, posted the video. We kept on getting feedback from it. And you know what? I said, fuck it, man. I called Nate and I said, hey, let's get on and let's talk deadlifts today. So we have Coach Nate Harvey with us today talking deadlifts. And, you know, this is a polarizing topic in the industry today because there's a lot of guys out.
There's other people saying not to deadlift whatsoever. Obviously, I don't believe in that. I want to talk to Nate about what he believes in and, more importantly, what he's had success with in his coaching career. My man, what's going on, brother?
What's up?
Dude, the beard's coming back. I like it.
Every time
Angry Santa has 3 months to get it down.
It's not cool. It's getting whiter and whiter.
Now, this is for you. No Rogue shirt today.
All right. We can hang with that.
All right. I realized I didn't have one Elite FTS shirt. I have like 16 sweatshirts, but it's like 85 degrees in Madison today, so I couldn't pull the sweatshirt off.
Jeez, man. We're like 60 here if I'm lucky right now.
All right, let's get to it.
T-shirts. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, you better give me. I'm waiting for my Conjugate U shirt. It's like 3 months later, I guess that thing got lost in the mail.
I ordered it. I'll talk to my guy.
All right, so we talked box squats last time. We're talking the deadlift today. And it's something that I look at as a non-negotiable movement pattern, as in the hip hinge pattern. It's something that I don't give a fuck who you are. You are going to be training the hip hinge with the strength emphasis on my style of programming, all the way from sports performance into youth athletes, general fitness, geriatrics, anybody, because it's one of our 6 foundational patterns. But you know, the deadlift gets a bad reputation because it is, quote unquote, the most injurious lift. People tend to fuck up their backs more on the deadlift than any other lift, but I also look at it as the most advantageous movement pattern to optimize in order to actually stay resilient at the lower back. So, you know, at your time at University of Buffalo, or even your time coaching your powerlifting athletes, you know, where does the deadlift fit in for you in terms of strength, resilience, capacity, and everywhere in between?
It kind of hit all those things you talked about. It's, you know, and it's funny, we would get freshmen coming in or kids that hadn't done it before, and they would always say, am I supposed to feel this in my back? You know what I mean? Because they've been told before, like, you shouldn't feel any exercise in your back. It's dangerous, all that bullshit, you know? But then we'd have to educate them, like, yeah, you feel it there because you're very weak there. So we're going to build this in and bring those areas up. So it's like, the back is a high rate of injury kind of area, but you have to address that, you know, and if you do it right, then you're going to be fine. But, you know, it's like you see people deadlifting online or whatever. It looks like a dog shitting razor blades. Like, obviously that's not what we want to do. But yeah, and it was, now that being said, there were certain groups that we just couldn't get it in with, like as a group, maybe the size of the group or the focus as a group wasn't there. So it wasn't worth the risk. But for the most part, like whenever we could put it in with a group, we would at least put some speed pulls in, or there was always a deadlift variant, whether there's RDL or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, though. Like, people hear deadlift, and they think that everybody has to pull a barbell off the ground with Olympic plates out of a conventional stance, and they have to go hard and heavy all the time. But you just alluded to it. There are many different variations. And really, the art of coaching becomes, how do you program in the variation that fits the needs, the goals, the wants of the client or the athlete in front of you? So, you know, in the university setting, like, you deloaded a little bit, use some speed, probably use some accommodating base resistances. What other variations were a really high risk to reward ratio for you, meaning that people got a lot out of them and really minimized the risk of pain or injury with them?
Things that worked really good with the deadlift with us was, you kind of touched on it a little bit with pulling from the floor. Like, a lot of our swimmers were like kind of tall and lanky, so pin pulls worked real well. We just started them a little higher. You know, I mean, some of those guys are like 6'3", 6'4". You know, Dave and I were talking about the basketball players. It makes no sense for a guy that tall to have to pull off the floor. It's like you or I doing it with dimes on each or tens on each side. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like a super deficit. So pin pulls were big, pulling off of blocks. Speed pulls were real big. I remember I had first gotten baseball back one year. We were training and we started putting speed pulls in. And it was at a time when I remember they were talking about doing 3s and 5s on your speed pulls out of West Side. So I was like, pretty much like a lot of stuff that comes out of there. I'm like, we'll try it. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
And within it was like 2 months. One day I was in the room and I was just kind of looking around, and everybody's backs and hamstrings were looking bare. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And it was the speed pulls. We really didn't do. We might have done like a heavy deadlift variation with those guys once a month at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So like the speed pulls and dumbbell RDLs, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Just that little bit of it, kind of microdosing, made a big difference. Same with our swimmers. A lot of them weren't exactly ready physically to do a lot of the heavy stuff. So we would just introduce it as speed work for a month or so. And I think just the movement, like you were talking about earlier, just the movement itself is super advantageous. So even if it's a lighter weight, putting that load on the body, like it's a great exercise.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's some trains of thought, though, and there's some true meatheads in our industry. It's like you are not a man unless you don't pull off the floor with the barbell. But I always go back to like 2018 when I was doing some stuff with Dave. Like we wanted to reintroduce a pull off of a bottom position for Dave. And it's not like we went right back to deadlifts out of a conventional stance for him. We went back to a trap bar with heavy chain, so it grounded it a tiny bit. And then we actually put the trap bar that has 5 inches on the top handle on a 2-inch block. And then he was able to pull really nicely from there using more of a hip dominant movement pattern. And that was a nice little variation to reintroduce it, to have him feeling good with it, to keep obviously the emphasis on box squats. But it's not like Dave was a fucking pussy for doing that. You know, he was still training it hard. He was really pushing it by the end there. So if somebody, I always go like, what would Dave Tate do? Like at that point in time, Dave was able to do that stuff in a re-implementation phase. Like, why are we putting our grandmothers through barbell conventional deadlifts if it doesn't fit their needs or their wants? It makes no sense to me. And then when it comes to the athletes, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. So, I mean, when we have all these different variations, you said it before, but I want you to expand upon this because, you know, we have a deadlift variation, which is truly like taking something from a stable surface, like the ground, like a pin, like blocks, and then coming back up in more of a concentric dominant movement pattern. But then you have the RDL that kind of goes through the eccentric lowering, change of direction phase, and then the concentric raising. How do you differentiate where you program an RDL variation versus a deadlift variation? Do you think they both should fit into a well-rounded program? I want you to touch a little bit more on RDLs here.
Yeah, they can. So to me, like an RDL is more of an accessory movement or a supplemental. So that would be like in my program, that would be like a secondary barbell movement, like basically your second exercise of the day. The other deadlift variations would either go in our max effort lane or speed lane. So like in other types of programming, that'd be like your big lift of the day. Okay. Kind of for the reasons you touched upon, there's not a whole lot of eccentric load. It's going to be a heavier load. Get your 1 to 5 reps or whatever you're doing, get out and then go on to the easier stuff. To me, an RDL is always less taxing than a normal deadlift variation. I think most of that's because of the load used.
Yeah.
You're typically not going to, you know, because the eccentric is there, you're not going to be able to use as much weight. So that's kind of how we set it up. I do feel like the RDL is overused. Maybe, you know, it's just like every program you look at, it's in there all the time. And that's not to say we didn't use it, but I think it's a good movement to kind of weave in and out, use it for 3 weeks, pull it out, use it for 3 weeks, pull it out. I think it's a great exercise, but I think if it's in there too much, just like a deadlift or no, conventional or pin pull, it's going to beat you up.
Yeah.
So kind of having that ebb and flow.
You're so right, though. It's like I see like the functionally minded coaches are out there. They're like, oh, whoa, I'm way too functional to be pulling anything from the ground. Like, oh, I'm not Louis Simmons or I'm not Dave Tate. And it's like, hold on a second here. Yeah, obviously there's advantages to going through a full range of motion, eccentric, concentric change of direction. But then there always has to be some of those concentric emphasis work that really just builds up, especially the reason that we use it is it really hones in the brace from a really hard position to actually dominate your breath from. Because you think about like standing up standing up in neutrality at the shoulders, at the hips, at the core, it's really easy to get that breath in, get that full expansion out and brace around that thing. But when you get down into a hinge with flexion at the knees, flexion at the hips, and then have that anterior torso angle, it's a lot harder. It's a bigger level motor task to actually get your breath from there. And I tend to introduce with RDLs, and exactly like you do. It's a strength builder at the top end strength, even into hypertrophy or metabolic stress based sets, anywhere from like 8 all the way up. But it is not something that we're doing for heavy 1s, 2s, or 3s, that's for sure. That's when people need to progress into actually pulling something off of a bottom position, more of a bottoms up approach. But yeah, it's so many people doing RDLs. I see this all the time when we work with the baseball athletes, or even in Major League and Minor League Baseball. Everyone wants to RDL the guys for 3 instead of doing trap bar deadlifts, or instead of doing sumo stance deadlifts or hybrid stance deadlifts. And really the advantages aren't there, especially for that high level of an athlete.
Yeah, it's people also get stuck on like the RDL is the only hamstring accessory movement you can do. Like if you have your guys do a back extension or reverse hyper or for a few weeks, their squat's not gonna drop by 50 pounds. You know what I mean? Like when I see that, my first thought is you don't fucking train. You don't understand that you can weave these things in and out and still be fine. You know what I mean? And going back to the heavy deadlifts, you can almost use those, like if you're going to plug a heavy deadlift or pin pull or whatever, you could almost work that in on like a deload week. So instead of doing like 3 rep max, 5 rep max, or sets of 2 on a squat like you might normally do, you just go in, pull 1 rep, work up. That's really probably, if you're doing it right, you should be about 7 total sets, starting with a bar, and then your ending weight, 7 sets, 7 singles, and then cut your accessory work down a little bit. So you can actually, as taxing as a deadlift is, you can actually kind of use it as a deload to throw it in there for a week or so.
Yeah, that's a really nice training tool, because you get the heavy loading on people, but when you don't have that heavy eccentric phase, the DOMS isn't going to be there. The muscular tension is down. It's more neurologically driven. People don't actually get that, but many times I see that thing butchered too, because then they'll be like lowering the bar down super slow and they have to do that 7 times for 7 singles. You're like, no, that just defeated the purpose. But I want to move on to like a big topic here, because this is something that I get a lot of questions about when we run the courses, the certifications, even our training clients. When should I be pulling conventional, with my hands outside my knees with a narrower stance? Or where should I be splitting my stance out a little bit wider, whether it be a squat stance, a hybrid stance, or even all the way out into a sumo stance where my hands are inside the knees? Like, as a coach, where do you make that differentiation between kind of either sumo or conventional, and how that fits the athlete or the client best?
We usually would we would start out learning sumo. And I actually heard Wenning talk about this a few years ago, and it made sense. He said, everybody's terrible at that. It's funny. Everybody wants to call sumo cheating, but if you take most people that pull conventional, and even strong people, if you move them out to a sumo stance, they'll probably get their ass kicked a little bit. You know what I mean? So when he kind of talked about like people are bad at that. So
why do you think that is though? Why do you think people struggle when they split the stance out?
They're not used to having their feet out there. You know what I mean? In everyday life, it's hip strength. So to me, in my eyes, to really get into the hips and train the hips, you've got to do some stuff with your feet out wide. So like we would start off with that, and we would slowly build the kids into it, get them proficient at that, and that might not even with maximal weights, just get them good at the movement. And then once they're good at the movement, then we would alternate, like every other time we pulled would be like a conventional or a sumo stance. So kind of bring up to speed the stuff they're shitty at, and then start working on everything.
Yeah, I think that that's going a little. Sumo's hard for many of the people that I work with. Like, they just don't have the hip mobility and the ability to stabilize out at those end ranges of motion and the external rotation. But when we split them out just a tiny bit, and we get the hands really tight to the insides of their knees, and they're almost in like their squat stance, that's a really well accepted stance for many people. And it actually allows them to pull lower and lower and lower. So it maybe takes them from a block pull of 4 inches conventionally down to maybe being able to pull off of 1 inch, or even being able to pull off the floor with a more neutral lower back lumbar spine position. And I think the reason being is like, man, your fucking hips are your hips. So it's not going to change whether you're squatting or you're deadlifting or you're sprinting or you're throwing. You know, your God-given bony structure is not going to change. So actually being able to centrate and get those hips into a sound position where we can actually activate around the adductors, getting those things involved, getting the glutes more involved, using a little bit more quadricep. I know that is like, oh man, don't use your quads during the deadlift. I heard that before. But I think that's probably a good thing for a vast majority of people, because the hip hinge is something that people have totally forgotten. I call it the most forgotten fundamental movement pattern on the face of the earth, because, you know, you take the average kid. I had 5, 6 kids in here this weekend, brand new kids. We weren't training. We were just kind of messing around, having some play. I had them take some kettlebells off the ground. I was like, oh,
yeah.
Like it was the worst movement I've ever seen. It was like that shitting dog, like you said, on the sidewalk, like literally laying a turd down. And you're like, whoa, okay. Like that kid is 7 years old. Like he's a good mover. He plays sports and stuff. What the hell happened? And it's just our society today. We don't use the hips like we used to, but we can't go, oh no, we're just going to start at the top of that pyramid, the most complex motor task. We're going to shove this thing in and see what happens. That's why we have these lower back pain issues in our industry today. But I love the sumo for many people. I love the hybrid stance, the squat stance for many people, because it meets them where they're at. It maximizes trainability and minimizes risk of injury. I mean, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We never did that, and I'm sure it would have worked. You know, the way we did, we would just go out wider and start with lighter weight. But that's a great idea. I think that would be tough to put in like a group setting. You know what I mean? Because then that athlete has to be cognizant enough of, okay, my feet were here last week. But that's just something I've never thought of. It's a really good idea. You know.
Now, in terms of like the variations and stuff, because I mean, I love like running like the functional conjugate where we're basically changing the max effort lift every single week. For lower body, we go between squats and deadlifts every other week. For upper body, we go between more of a flat press or an angled press every other week. But for the deadlift variations, like the way that you cycle them in and out, are you using the trap bar at all in the training with the hip hinge? Or are you kind of taking that out and classifying it differently?
We didn't use it much just because we had like 1 or 2 of them, to be honest, in the weight room. And our kids did a pretty good job of picking things up, you know. And I've talked a little bit of shit about the trap bar before, but it's not terrible. My complaint with it is when people do it all the time. You know what I mean? We get too dependent on it. And then my issue is, it turns into like a quarter squat. We're training a quarter squat week in and week out, and we're not getting through the other movement patterns.
Definitely.
If that makes sense. You know what I mean? So it's not a bad tool, like you were talking about with Dave. It let him deadlift, and at some point his low back's going to be taxed, and it's going to, you know, get you to what you're trying to do. But if you're doing it every week for every main movement, it's like.
But that's what we see, right? It's, again, that functional guru that's saying, oh, well, we're still going to lift, but we're not going to lift with that barbell because the barbell, you know, that shit is evil. We turn into trap bar everything, and it turns into exactly what you say. Huge anterior knee translation, squatting up a quarter squat, and really having some kind of nasty, like unstable load going through the lower back. And I'm not a monstrous fan of that. I think the trap bar, when executed with more of hip dominancy, is a great lift if you're going to plug it and play it into a trap or deadlift variant for your programming. But if you have people just trying to go super heavy on it, squatting it up, then no longer is that training with the goal of training the posterior chain dominancy of an actual hip hinge itself. Like, I remember a couple of years ago, like Bryce Harper was like 3 or 4 weeks out from spring training. You probably remember this video. It went viral on ESPN. And his coach was sitting there like clapping. He's like, all right, Bryce, last big lift before we get into spring training. It's all you, bro. And he only had like 495 on the bar. And he just does the worst trap bar deadlift that you ever have seen. The knees literally like shot so far forward, I thought he was going to hit the trap bar with it. The spine was going all over the place. And he barely locked it out. He just friggin' drops it. And then the coach is clapping in the background. I literally bring this up almost every single seminar because I was like, guys, just because you're using a fucking trap bar doesn't mean that you're any more safe if you're executing like shit. Execution, movement patterning, bracing, core control all still matters. just this functional tool is no better than the barbell if you're executing it like shit. But that's a tough one, because when weights get heavy, people run into those bad movement pattern, the default pattern that sits in the back of their brains. Many times with the trap bar, it's just what you said. They start squatting that stuff up. I've even heard, many professionals, some of them I really respect, they don't even look at the trap bar deadlift as a deadlift variant. They look at it as a squat. And I was like, it depends on execution, but
Yeah.
that's a totally different story.
Yeah, it's you go to something heavy. Your buddy used to say this: you do something maximal effort, max speed, max strength, whatever top end kind of movement you're doing, your body is going to survive. That's it. So it's going to go back to all those bad motor patterns that you're talking about. And it's people ask me all the time, like especially high school coaches and stuff. They'll say, what can we do to make our kids better? What's the most important thing in programming? Should I have bands? Should I have chains? Should I have this? And my number one answer all the time is make sure the kids lift right. You know what I mean? Just make sure they squat
that's exactly
right.
what they want to hear. They're like, so bands?
Yeah. So what percentage should I use? Just fucking squat right.
Now, with this is the last question I want to hit with you, because this is, again, it's pretty polarizing. So I tend to always have people, general fitness population, overhand grip their deadlifts. Like, I put a lot of emphasis in getting people's grip strength extremely strong, almost having that be the restrictor plate on many of their pulling variations, because I'll call it what it is. In the last 3 years, I've had 5 clients that I was managing in mixed grips tear their biceps. And I'm not too proud to say that. The pain-free training guy has had athletes been hurt, and I was managing a lot of people over this 3-year period, but 5 was too much for me to stomach. I was like, man, after the first one, I was like, man, fucking fluke just happens. Second one hits, third one hits, fourth one, I'm like, oh man, I'm really starting to listen up. And then the fifth one, I'm like, man, this is pretty crazy. So we tend to double overhand everything. And then again, there's no harm in using straps, especially when we go over 90%, having not the grip be the limiting factor for the hips. But I know you competed, you pulled a lot of weight in competition. You have your guys mixed grip. How do you program between double overhand, maybe different grip styles, mixed grips, and all that stuff while keeping your guys healthy? Because, throwing for baseball and having a healthy wing and a healthy bicep is kind of important.
Yeah, that's a great point. We would, when we were teaching, I would typically say go double overhand as long as you can. And then at some point you're going to have to mix grip. And we would mix grip. But I think the difference is, I was there to watch it. Those people tearing their biceps is not your fault, because there's stuff going on there that you can't, during the lift, you can't control. And when we did pull, we didn't pull that often heavy, you know what I mean? So it was, maybe once a month or whatever, maybe twice a month when we'd pull a little more often. But the big thing is flex that tricep. I tore half my bicep off, and it was because my underhand, the grip started to open up, and then I tried to curl my fingers back up, and just pop, pop, pop. So it's kind of those.
This does happen, because people act like, oh man, this doesn't ever happen. Bicep tears on deadlift mixed grip doesn't happen. I'm like, it fucking does. It happened to me. It happens to basically every lifter and coach that I know. And now for you specifically, so obviously you're still mixed gripping, you're doing different things. What did you change after that biceps injury on the mixed grip after? What were the coaching cues or the programming changes that you made?
Flex my triceps before I pull, and if my hand's going to open up, it's going to open up. I'm not trying to wrist curl the fucking thing back in again. And it's funny. It's funny. So I used to have my grip used to be opposite, and I was with my athletes. I would come back from meets and they'd say, "How did it go?" I'd say, "Pretty good, but I dropped my last deadlift." So I was kind of getting known for dropping deadlifts. And it was my left hand. It was my underhand. And I also had some sort of shoulder issues going on there. And later I found out there was a small labral tear. So I think that was part of that hand that kept opening up. So over time, I'm like, okay, I'm going to switch my grip and see if my right hand will hold on better. Well, when I did that, I was holding on to, we were doing stuff in the gym where my grip was rock solid. So had I not done that wrist curl, I probably would be able to pull a lot more. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I was like, I kind of fixed the problem. So, you know, if you do have a hand that's your underhand and it keeps opening up, you might have something else going on up in the shoulder.
That's a really good point too. Like, there's so many things I want to retouch on because, like, so basically your general recommendation is, you know, when you're using light weights, you're ramping weights, your speed work, fucking double overhand that stuff and call it a day. And then maybe once or twice a month when you actually do pull heavy, it's cool to get a couple sets in at the top because, you know, 95% of your pulling volume is going to be in a double overhand anyways. But I think sometimes people are like confused. Like, there are advantages from a strength and a neurological standpoint of mixed gripping. It's not all about like, oh, just because you can hang on to it, that makes you stronger. Like, the body is naturally asymmetrical. So like, we have different organs in different places. Your shoulder structure, your hip structure on your right and left are different. Everyone's going to have a strong side and a mobile side, and we're not all the same like we were taught in a textbook at University of Buffalo. Like, that is for sure. But I think when we actually work into those asymmetries with that mixed grip, it's like we can use the tiny asymmetries that we do have, and it's way more of a potent neurological environment for us to actually be explosive with. You know, you've been around some extremely strong guys, some of the strongest guys in the world or world history. You know, where do you see the asymmetry in the deadlift actually being advantageous? And where do you see where a little bit is too much?
Most of the guys I've seen are powerlifters. So as long as they can pull and be straight for the most part, for lack of a better term, you're fine. But like, sometimes you'll start to see that the bar kind of start to windmill out. You know what I mean? So that could be a grip issue. Sometimes you can scoot your hand out a little bit to kind of fix that. It could be a hip issue. You know, there's a lot of different things that can go on. So, but you can have that asymmetry in there and still have symmetrical movement, if that makes sense. You know, once the movement, just like everything else, we keep going back to movement. Once the movement starts to look goofy, then try to figure it out and address it. You know what I mean? And it's cool that you brought up the wrist straps too. Like, if they're not a competitive powerlifter, who cares how much weight they can hold on to?
Yeah.
Right? We're trying to make their body strong. So why not throw them on?
I like them. I mean, I use the cheapest shit ones from Elite FTS that I've had for like 3 years. Like, it's the same strap. I think they're like $7. They're pretty awesome. That's a shameless plug for Elite right there. But, you know, the one thing that I do have a gripe with using straps on deadlift is that you spend so much time fucking with your hands down at the bottom of the range of motion that I tend to personally, and I see this with my athletes all the time, they tend to have less of a brace, less ability to bring in their air, draw in their air, and be really strong and stable through the hips and the core while they spend 6, 7, 8 seconds down fucking with their straps. So, you know, as a coach that you're going to have your athletes lift with straps, like, what's the ideal setup? Some bend down on one knee to do it. Some actually put it on the top. Like, where do you tend to see the best success with gaining your air still, but also having grip not being a limiting factor using the straps?
That's a great point. So like maybe 10 years ago or so in powerlifting, like, you would see nobody using straps because that was for sissies, right? Well, now we're starting to see some of the strongest guys in the world in the deadlift. They're using straps. Now, you talked about getting set up and bracing. Like, when I set up, my feet are set. I take my air in. My underhand goes down. Then my overhand goes down. And then I roll over and kind of arch up into it. If I have straps on, like you said, I'm going to be down there forever and I'm going to pass out. You know, like, I can't. So for me to use straps right now, I haven't figured that out yet. I haven't figured out how to get the straps on and be efficient and get into the bar. So that might be something with your clients, you know, if they got to figure out a way to use the straps and keep their bracing, like you said. You know, it's a tough balance, I think. I haven't figured it out.
Yeah, it's a tough one for us, and it's so individual dependent. Like, everyone's going to be a little bit different. You know, my guy that's deadlifting 650, I want him to go in with a mixed grip, get as much air as he possibly can, because I don't want his back to be breaking on that 650 deadlift. But, you know, my 112-pound female client who's 46 years old, like, I'm totally cool with her going in and deadlifting 240 with straps, spending 5 or 6 seconds down there, because again, the load is the determining factor of where I want to kind of weigh that risk to reward ratio. But it's not all the same for everybody. Everyone's looking for like the golden answer that will work for everybody. And in terms of straps, like personally, I don't ever use straps. I try to double overhand everything. I've gotten to the point where I'm about equal with my grip and my hips, which is probably a different story on why I need to get a bigger ass. But, you know, I like that sometimes because there is some high science on, you know, the synergy between grip strength, recoverateness, and also core activation. So the higher the grip strength, the more recovered you tend to be, but also the better pillar complex you tend to have in terms of bracing capacity. So you know what, like if I was on a bender after the UW win last weekend and I'm going in on Monday to pull heavy, maybe I can't hold on to anything. Maybe that's a fucking good thing. You know, maybe that's the restrictor plate on the Ferrari that I need. That's just me, you know, at this point in time, 2 kids at home wanting to travel and teach and train pain-free. That's kind of where I sit into, but I also have clientele that, you know, their whole life is lifting heavy weights and just getting strong as fuck. And it's always a different risk to reward for every single person.
Yeah, that's a great point. We used to, our kids and myself included, you know, pulling heavy kind of smokes you. Like we would get kids come in after heavy deadlift days and they just kind of ask me, you know, hey, how you feeling after yesterday or whatever. They're like, I can't even fucking think straight in class today. And then they would also complain about their hands being sore. So like you said, there's a huge tie in there because there's so many nerve endings, I think, in your hands. Your hands get beat up, your CNS will start to get beat up too.
Definitely.
You know, so there's a huge tie in there that you're hitting on.
And it's something simple. It's not like you need a heart rate variability monitor to tell you that your grip strength sucks that one day versus another. It's something very easy. It's something that really restricts something bad from potentially happening. Not like it's inherently dangerous, but you know, it's something to always think about. I want to leave you with one last question though. So this is just selfish at this point because I'm like, man, I want to hear what Nate has to say about this. So with many of our athletes, we tend to squat and deadlift on the same day, different derivatives of both of those lifts. My athletes tend to have a harder time going back into the squat rack after deadlifts, as opposed to squatting heavy and then going into maybe like a 3 to a 10 deadlift or RDL variation. You know, have you been pulling back your squats differently or programming your squats differently after deadlifts, or have you seen, you know, anything potentially like just fry the CNS to the point where they can't perform their accessory work as well?
Not really. We usually just squatted first instead of pulling first. Just because of how taxing the deadlift is. Not to say that you can't do it. Not to say that it can't be done with great results. Usually if we pulled heavy, our next movement would be like belt squat, or that's where we'd throw like a single leg variation in. Yeah. Because because the deadlift was so highly taxing, the single leg variation would be less taxing, but more structurally taxing because they weren't used to it. So that was kind of how we balanced that. But I can see that, you know, just the deadlifts. It's called the deadlift for a reason because it's fucking tough. You know what I mean? But yeah, it depends what your goal is for the day. You know what I mean? Do I want to pull a heavy weight? And then, like, if they have a really great day pulling or whatever, and their squats suffer a little bit, that's okay because their squats weren't first priority that day.
Right. You know yeah, I mean? We try to switch every other wave for our dynamic effort, where we start the squat first, or then squat the deadlift, or put the deadlift first. But almost every single time I get done with the deadlift first and dynamic effort, I'm like, holy fuck, I have to squat right now. And everyone else is thinking exactly the same thing. And it's almost to the point where maybe taking the recommendation and always having that squat hit first, especially with the dynamic effort work that you know you're going to train speed on both of those patterns that day. You know, that tends to be smart, but it's something that I've been so focused on, like, no, everything must be even, everything must be progressed and moving in and out in different sequences that, fuck it, maybe we should just squat first all the time.
I mean, you're tougher than me if you're pulling first of all. But I mean, really, if you think about it, like from a general population standpoint, switching those up every week kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to a meet where they have to squat first and then pull or whatever. Definitely. You're trying to get them to move fast with some maximal loads. So it might make sense to switch that up every week just to keep the stimulus different. You know what I mean?
So
as much as
this
they
last,
hated on the pull first weeks.
this last deadlift dynamic wave that we did, so we did the RNT band. I wrote an article like 4 or 5 years ago on RNT banding for the big barbell lifts, and Dave and I were fucking around texting each other about it because Westside put up a picture of them front angling the bands and everyone just losing their shit on it. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to throw this back into the wave. And I swear to God, I have never been so messed up from like 8 triples at speed with 60 seconds between, then having that band pulling the bar forward on me with chains with accommodating resistance. Like, it was a different level of hurt. It was like pure neurological frying. Like, I've never felt anything like it. Then I said, oh, fuck, we have to squat now. And it was brutal. But, hey, man, I appreciate it as always. This is good. You know, we got to hop on here next month. Fuck it, let's talk bench press next time.
Sounds good, man. I'm in. I really appreciate you having me on, dude.
No, this is great. And for everyone who's still in the room here, like, a lot of you guys don't know that, like, Nate and I are both from Buffalo, New York. And, you know, it's something that we're both proud of. But, you know, coming full circle back around, I'm in Madison. Nate's still out in Buffalo. But always coming back to people that kind of grew up with you. It's the fucking best, man.
Yep, very cool. It's very cool.
All right, dude. Well, I appreciate it as always. People got a ton out of this. Make sure you guys are following Nate. Make sure you guys are following Elite FTS, Under the Bar, Dave Tate, and we will see you next time. Later.